My husband of 7 years told me he was leaving me for his ex-girlfriend because she has nobody else and needs me more than you do. When I asked what about our life together, he said you're strong, you'll figure it out. I smiled and said you're absolutely right, I will. What I figured out destroyed him. I'm 32F and my husband David 34M have been married for 7 years. We met in college, dated for 3 years, and got married right after graduation. I thought we had a solid marriage built on mutual respect, shared goals, and genuine love. We own a beautiful home together, have successful careers, and we're actively trying for our first baby. Everything seemed perfect until 3 months ago when David's ex-girlfriend Rachel had what he called a mental health crisis. Rachel 33F was David's college girlfriend before me. They dated for 2 years and had what David always described as an intense but toxic relationship. According to David, Rachel was emotionally unstable, manipulative, and prone to dramatic outbursts. Their relationship ended badly when Rachel cheated on David with his roommate. Then blamed David for driving her to it because he wasn't emotionally available enough. David was devastated at the time, which is actually how we met. I was a friend who helped him through the breakup. After David and I started dating, Rachel would occasionally pop back into his life during her various crises. She'd call him crying about failed relationships, job problems, or family drama. Early in our relationship, I expressed discomfort with these calls, but David insisted he was just being a good friend to someone who was struggling. He said Rachel had a difficult childhood and didn't have many people she could rely on. Against my better judgment, I decided to trust David's judgment and stopped objecting to their occasional contact. Over the years, Rachel's crisis calls became less frequent, and I honestly forgot about her most of the time. David rarely mentioned her, and when he did, it was usually in the context of feeling sorry for her latest unfortunate situation. I knew she'd gone through several failed engagements, had been fired from multiple jobs, and had a falling out with most of her family. David would shake his head sadly and say things like I feel bad for her, she just can't seem to get her life together. 3 months ago, David came home from work looking troubled. He said he'd gotten a call from Rachel's sister saying Rachel had been hospitalized after what appeared to be a suicide attempt. David was clearly shaken by the news and said he felt terrible that he hadn't been in touch with Rachel recently. He said her sister told him Rachel had been going through a particularly rough patch, she'd lost her job, her latest fiancé had left her and she'd been struggling with depression. I should visit her in the hospital, David said. She doesn't have many people, and I might be able to help. I told David the first thought it was kind of him to want to support Rachel, but I suggested he should be careful about getting too involved in her drama. I reminded him that Rachel had a pattern of creating chaos in her relationships and that he should protect his own mental health. David said he understood my concerns but felt obligated to help someone who was clearly in crisis. David visited Rachel in the hospital twice while she was there for a week-long psychiatric hold. When he came home from these visits, he seemed emotionally drained and distracted. He said Rachel was in a very dark place and felt like everyone in her life had abandoned her. According to David, Rachel had specifically mentioned feeling grateful that he was the only person who still cared about her. After Rachel was released from the hospital, David started visiting her at her apartment to check on her and make sure she was taking her medication. These visits happened about twice a week and usually lasted several hours. David said Rachel was too fragile to be left alone for long periods and that he was worried she might hurt herself again if she didn't have someone to talk to. I started feeling uncomfortable with the amount of time David was spending with Rachel, but every time I brought it up, David would say I was being unsympathetic to someone who was suicidal. He said Rachel was in therapy and on medication, but that recovery was a long process and she needed support from people who cared about her. He reminded me that I'd always prided myself on being compassionate and asked if I really wanted him to abandon someone who might die without his help. Guilt trips worked for a while. I convinced myself that I was being selfish and that David was just being a good person by helping someone in crisis. I tried to be supportive and even suggested that we could have Rachel over for dinner sometimes so she could feel like she had a broader support network. David said that was a nice idea but that Rachel wasn't ready for social situations yet. About 6 weeks ago, I noticed that David was texting constantly. When I asked who he was talking to, he said it was Rachel. Apparently, her therapist had suggested she reach out to supportive people when she was feeling low, and David had told her she could text him anytime. David said Rachel was having multiple panic attacks per day and that his quick responses to her texts were helping her feel less alone. The texting escalated quickly. David would wake up in the middle of the night to respond to Rachel's messages. He'd excuse himself from our dinner dates to take her calls. He started working from home more often so he could be available if Rachel needed him. When I pointed out that this seemed excessive, David said I didn't understand what it was like to be responsible for keeping someone alive. If Rachel hurts herself because I didn't answer her texts fast enough, how would I live with myself? He'd say, "You're strong and independent. Rachel needs me in a way you never have." I started feeling like I was competing with Rachel for my own husband's attention. David was spending more time thinking about Rachel's needs than mine. He missed my work promotion celebration because Rachel was having a panic attack. He canceled our anniversary dinner because Rachel called crying about feeling suicidal. Every conversation we had seemed to circle back to Rachel's latest crisis. 2 weeks ago, things came to a head. I told David the first was concerned that his relationship with Rachel was becoming unhealthy and that he might be enabling her instead of helping her. I suggested that Rachel needed professional help beyond what he could provide and that he should encourage her to rely more on her therapist and less on him. David got angry and accused me of being jealous of someone who was mentally ill. He said I was being cruel and selfish by asking him to reduce his support for someone who was suicidal. He said he was disappointed in me and had expected better from the woman he married. Rachel has nobody else, he said. Her family has given up on her, she has no friends, and she's told me multiple times that I'm the only reason she's still alive. How can you ask me to abandon someone in that situation? I told David that while I sympathized with Rachel's struggles, I was worried that their relationship was crossing boundaries and affecting our marriage. I said I felt like Rachel's mental health had become more important to him than his own wife's feelings. David said that wasn't true, but that Rachel's needs were more urgent than mine because she was in crisis. You're strong, he said. You can handle feeling neglected for a while. Rachel might not survive if I don't help her through this. Last week, David dropped the bomb that changed everything. He came home from one of his visits to Rachel's apartment looking conflicted and nervous. He said he needed to talk to me about something important. Rachel kissed me today, he said. She said she's realized that I'm the only person who's ever really understood her and that she thinks she's in love with me. I felt my stomach drop. I asked David what he'd said to Rachel when she kissed him. He said he told her it was complicated because he was married, but that he couldn't deny he still had feelings for her too. Still had feelings? I repeated. What do you mean still had feelings? David said that being around Rachel so much had reminded him of the intense connection they used to have. He said he tried to ignore his feelings because he knew it was wrong. But that Rachel's vulnerability had made him realize he'd never stopped caring about her in a deep way. I asked David if he was having an affair with Rachel. He said they hadn't slept together, but that he couldn't promise it wouldn't happen because the emotional connection was too strong. He said he was confused about his feelings and needed time to figure out what he wanted. What about our marriage? I asked, what about the fact that we've been trying to have a baby? What about the life we've built together? David said he loved me and didn't want to hurt me. But that he felt